Hi, my name is Miguel Roel, and I'm here on behalf of the Emily Taylor Center to show you how to make chilaquiles. It's one of my favorite Mexican dishes to make. It's very economical and easy to make once you know what you're doing. So please join me as I show you how to make chilaquiles. So before we get into how to cook chilaquiles, let me explain to you what chilaquiles are. So chilaquiles are a traditional Mexican dish that's made from fried tortillas, eggs, and salsa. Now, I know that sounds pretty basic, but the thing about chilaquiles is there's many different ways to make them that depend on which region of Mexico you're in and your own family's way of doing things. So the way I'm going to show you is the way my family's made chilaquiles, but my family's from the north of Mexico. So in southern Mexico, it's made a little bit differently. Sometimes it's made more of like a porridge of eggs and tortillas. Whereas me, I'm frying my tortillas to make them crispy before I add the eggs and salsa in at the end. So to make chilaquiles, you only need a few cooking instruments, the primary of which, of course, is the frying pan. Now, the frying pan we have here, this is a stainless steel frying pan with a pretty thick bottom, and that changes the temperature at which I'm going to need to fry the tortillas. So if you're using something like a thin Teflon frying pan, you're going to want to use a lower heat than what I use in this video. When I cook with a thin Teflon pan, usually I'm cooking around medium. With this pan, I'm going to cook at medium high. Other than the frying pan, we have a spatula and a fork. I like to use a combination of a spatula and a fork to flip my tortillas as I'm frying them, but you can use any instrument that works for you for flipping tortilla chips. Other than that, we have a plate with paper towels, and this is where we're going to put our tortillas after we're done frying them to let them drain some of the oil off. So as I said before, chilaquiles is a very simple and economical meal to make. And as you can see, our three primary ingredients are just eggs, salsa, and corn tortillas. And these are the spices we're going to use. From left to right, we have black pepper, salt, onion powder, garlic powder, chili powder, ground cumin, and cayenne pepper. You can of course supplement with any spices that you like, but these are the ones I generally use when I'm making chilaquiles. So to start with, we're going to grab a stack of tortillas. How many depends on how big of a serving of chilaquiles you're going to make, but for two people, I'd say about 12 tortillas is good. You take your stack of tortillas and you cut them into quarters to make tortilla chip sized segments. So this is about the size you want your chilaquile chips to be. So as you can see, now that the tortillas have been quartered, they're much more manageable and they're going to be a lot easier for me to flip and maintain their shape while I'm frying them. Okay, now that we have our tortillas quartered, we're going to start the cooking process. To begin with, we want to preheat our stovetop. This is a glass stovetop. So I have it set to 8. Now, as I said before, this is a stainless steel pan with a thick bottom, so I cook more towards the high end of the heat spectrum to really get it to the point where it can fry these chips. I'm going to let it preheat for a few minutes before I add my oil, and I use canola oil because it has a very mild flavor, and it's easy to cook with and it has a high smoke point. So I'm going to let my pan preheat for a little bit and then add my oil. Okay, so my pan's been preheating for a few minutes, so it's ready for the oil. I'm going to add my oil, and you don't need too much. You really only need enough that's going to cover a single layer of tortilla chips. Now, you'll know it's been preheated when you can see the oil kind of swimming around in the pan. So it moves freely. It's not like, syrupy like it is when it's at room temperature. And you can just start adding your tortillas. And you can see them frying, you can see them bubbling and frying and hear them frying, so you know you've hit the right temperature. And you just want to make a single layer of tortillas in the pan. Now, how long you're going to fry them on each side again, depends on your stovetop and it depends on your pan. Because this is a stainless steel pan, it distributes the heat pretty evenly, and it also absorbs a lot of the heat. So it takes a little bit longer to brown them on both sides, whereas when I'm cooking this in a thin Teflon pan, they tend to brown a lot quicker, so you're able to cook them faster. But the way I know they're ready to be flipped is when they start turning brown and crispy around the edges. So I have my spatula and my fork ready so I can flip, but we're just going to wait here, watch them fry, and just keep an eye on those edges and wait until you start seeing them turn brown. Okay, as you can see, they're starting to get brown around the edges, so I'm going to start flipping these, and you can see that's perfect. They're nice and golden brown. You want to be pretty, quick to flip them because they can overcook pretty quickly. Now, the amount of time we're going to let them cook on this side is a little bit less because they've already gotten pretty crispy, and we don't need them to be as crispy as like actual tortilla chips you get in a bag. So what I do is I just sort of toss them in the oil to let the oil crisp them up on the other side a little bit, and that should be good. And then what I do is I gather them all on one side of the pan, try and let the oil run to the other side, just to sort of save as much oil in the pan as I can. Very slippery. And then I just start spooning them on to my paper towels. Now we can start with another layer. So you're just going to continue this process back to back until all of your tortilla chips have been fully fried and you have a nice plate full of crispy tortilla chips. Okay, so as you can see, we have a nice plate of golden fried tortillas. I have my pan here. I've drained off a little bit of the oil. You don't want to keep too much in there, just enough to fry up the rest of the ingredients, which are eggs mostly, and then we're going to add salsa with the chips. So keep a little bit of oil in your pan. You want to turn the heat down to kind of a medium-low because there's a lot of residual heat that's still in here that's going to help with the rest of the cooking. And what we're going to do now is we're going to transfer all of our chips back into the pan. I like to use a little fork to kind of help me scrape it in. So as you can see, we've got just enough room really to fit all of them in there. Okay, now I'm going to grab my eggs right here. And immediately you want to start cracking eggs into this pan. Now the amount of eggs that you use is really up to your personal taste. You can make it really, really eggy and soupy, or you can make it a little bit drier. I like to have mine a little bit drier. So I'm going to put probably around 6 eggs into here. I just do it by eye. Yeah, you want to crack them in as fast as possible so they can absorb that heat so the chips don't get burned. So there's 6 eggs, but I think I'm going to add a couple more. I think that should be good. I'm going to take my spatula And I'm going to break the yolks. I'm going to scrape the bottom. Really try and toss these so that the chips get coated in the egg a little bit. You can see, even though I'm on low, the residual heat from frying these is still in the pan, so they're cooking pretty fast. But now that the eggs have gotten to the bottom, they've absorbed a lot of that heat, so the pan is finally starting to cool down, which is good. It's going to give us some time. You don't want to cook things too fast because you do want the chips to be able to soak up some of the egg and soften a little bit. There you go. So that's coated pretty nicely around all of the tortillas. Now I'm going to add my salsa. You can use any kind of salsa that you like. You can use green salsa, red salsa, homemade salsa. I'm using this roasted chipotle salsa. I really like it. So you're going to want to put almost like a quarter of a jar into here. I know that seems like it might be a lot, but again, you can modulate it how you like, but the salsa really adds a lot of the flavor. And again, it helps kind of soften up the chips. And give us our distinctive chilaquile look. Actually, I think I might add a little bit more salsa in here, actually. But again, this is all towards your personal preference and taste. So if you like them drier, you can use only a little bit of salsa. But I've used almost half a jar in this particular batch. And now that we've got all our wet ingredients combined, tossed around in here, I'm going to start with my seasoning. Okay, that feels nice and incorporated to me. It's going to slowly cook off the moisture. I'm going to increase it to medium-low. I'm going to add the rest of my ingredients, starting with pepper. Now the amount of seasonings you add, I don't measure my seasonings, I just do it by eye and according to my personal taste, but I basically put a layer of each seasoning on here. So a good amount of pepper, a layer of garlic powder, layer of onion powder, chili powder. Now chili powder really isn't spicy, it just adds a nice smokiness, so don't be afraid of putting too much in. The cayenne pepper is really what adds the kick, so depending on how much spice you like, add more or less. I just put a few dabs in there. And then the cumin, and this is really, to me, what gives me that flavor, that Mexican flavor. So you add a few dashes of cumin in there. And finally, salt. I use kosher salt. It's what I'm used to using, so I can modulate it, but just a little layer of salt. There you go. Now you can toss those spices in. And now because we've already stirred up all of our wet ingredients, it's going to be a lot easier to stir those spices in without them flying out of the pan. As you can see, our pan is pretty crowded, which is why I wait to season until the last moment. I used to season my chips first, but I found that that was too messy. So now I wait until my wet ingredients are all incorporated. As you can see, the eggs are starting to be fully cooked. Salsa is starting to cook off its moisture, and this is almost done. Now, the eggs are pretty much fully cooked, so if you like it this texture, you can have it exactly like this. But for me, as I said before, I like it a little bit drier, so I'm going to let it cook for just another minute. Okay. And then I'm going to take it off the heat. Now, it's still going to cook a little bit when I take it off the heat because of the residual heat that's inside of it, so I don't want it to be like bone dry. But that is about done for me. This is a little bit softer than I usually make it, just because I didn't crisp up my chips as much as I usually do. But nevertheless, this is still a good batch of chilaquiles, and I'll show you how I plate it in one moment. Okay, now we've got our plate, we've got our chilaquiles. I like to plate right here in the middle. Now, if I'm doing a really fancy meal of chilaquiles, I'll also make homemade refried beans to have on the side, and some queso fresco to pinch over the top, and some fresh cilantro. But this, I'm just showing you guys the basics because maybe you don't like cilantro, maybe you don't eat cheese, and maybe you don't like beans. So those are all things that you can just add on your own. But there you go, there's a plate of chilaquiles. And then I like to add salsa over on the side so that I can have some more with each bite. And there you go, a plate of chilaquiles. Thank you for joining me as I showed you how to cook chilaquiles. I hope you learned something and enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe to see more Emily Taylor Center content in the future. Thank you.